spent some time listening to my episode from last week, and I admittedly was a little heated, understandably. It is what it is. It's now a week from that and 2 days from the inauguration. And we're all kind of, holding our breath, waiting with bated breath, hoping for the best for Wednesday so we can kind of start moving towards some sort of progress. And hoping that we can kind of somehow survive all of what we've kind of been through over the last 3-4 years. I'm mostly recording this for a future version of myself. I hope to come back to this in a couple of days or a week and listen to this and think, that my fears were unwarranted and that everything is under control. So this episode is kind of like, remember when you were a kid in grade school and you had to leave little notes for a future version of yourself to uncover at your school, which now that I think about it was supposed to happen right around this time when I did it in school, and it hasn't been unearthed. So I guess we can count on a future generation uncovering whatever it was that I left in my box back in 8th grade. But yeah, so this episode is kind of be like that. We know that January 20th, 2021 is going to be historical, no matter what happens. I mean, we are in the throngs of history, to see Washington, D.C. flooded with National Guard. This is the first time, I think, at least in modern American history, where we have witnessed a failure of a president to transfer power peacefully. And we've learned a lot. I've learned a lot over the last 4 years, a lot about civics, a lot about about the American Republic and about our democracy. I've never Googled so much shit about American civics as I have over the last year. And we're still learning. There's a lot of things that we took for granted, one of which was the peaceful transition of power. When the interviewers at the debates would ask, Trump if he would commit to a peaceful transition of power, I didn't really understand the gravity of that question. And I honestly almost blame reporters for not making the general public understand the gravity of that question. And perhaps there's this sense of complacency that I mentioned in the previous episode that we all kind of suffer from. We're a little deluded, in the sense that we think that bad things can't happen here. And I hope that we are sort of sheltered and shielded by our delusion. There's something to be said about the power of belief and how it can shape our reality. I'm going to delve into that a little bit on this episode. But yeah, this is my little time box, my time recording. And I'm recording this intentionally, consciously, with the intent to, come back and listen to this a week from now and a month from now and see how I feel. Assuming I exist a month from now and a week from now. I laugh, but you just never know. Shit's really fucking crazy right now. It's intense. There is this quote that says, it's like a blessing, may you live in interesting times. And I've heard that a couple of times leading up into, recent years. And I always thought, oh, that's an interesting sort of blessing. But now I'm like, fuck that, man. I want to live in dull, boring times, like when President Carter was president. You know what I mean? Our budget was balanced, our military was, kind of, I don't want to use the word defunded, but not, overly funded. I saw a tweet yesterday or maybe today where somebody said, you spent all this money we spent on defense. All this money we spend every year, trillions of dollars spent on, our military budget, building bombs and tanks and guns and all this crazy shit. And look what the fuck is happening. The media, right there on our own doorstep. You have channels like Fox News and OANN and, 4chan and Parler, they have become more or less the Trojan horse, if you will, in this country. What is the defense to that? You know what I mean? Like, who would have thought? Like, we spent all this time, energy, and money preparing to defend ourselves against, external circumstances, right? It's like having a really expensive house and you hire a security guard, right? And you put up a fence and you put up a wall and you put up, a barricade and you put up cameras, right? To shelter you, to shield you from external threats. And then your house catches on fire because your cat knocks over like a candle or something like that. Or worse, your security guard. You didn't properly vet your security guard, and now he is attacking you. I mean, which is basically what happened. I had a couple of people asking me, like, how did America get to this point? And there's not one answer to that. I mean, I can answer you in a big esoteric way, like it was destined to. This is the story for this timeline that we are existing in right now. It's already been pre-scripted and we're just experiencing it. So that's the, big picture, macro level explanation to that, and that's probably closer to the truth than anything else, because we're all most of us are, automatic beings that just sort of go through life existing and reacting as opposed to making conscious choices. But on the micro level, we took this whole thing of anybody can be president a little too literally. You know what I mean? And this guy just was not properly vetted. Like we have no idea about what was in his tax returns because he refused to release it. And somehow that was okay. All the ties that this guy had to, Russia, to Eastern Europe, the sort of things that kind of had come up. I mean, this guy was in the public. The racist things that he had done and said throughout, the years, we sort of kind of glossed over because he was a media personality. And even as he ran, like the behavior, the deplorable behavior that he displayed, which is sort of ignored. It's like watching, if you pause and take a step back and look at everything, it's almost like you're watching an accident in slow motion, and yet you probably had the power to stop it, but not on your own, right? And then the people who were supposed to make the rest of us conscious of, okay, like, this isn't okay, weren't being listened to. It was just all sort of fun and games, like, because once again, complacency led us to think that we would just be okay. And we're not okay. We're not okay. This is not okay. Having, tens of thousands of troops, at DC out of fear of domestic terrorism. Domestic terrorism is not okay. For decades, America's solution was, if we're a threat, we just go and bomb the fuck out of your country, right? And now the threat is coming from within. The call is coming from inside of the house, so to speak, right? In a scary movie. What is your defense against that? I've spoken on earlier episodes, previous episodes. Some of my favorite episodes, actually, of mine, have to do with when I do more deeper dives into the esoteric and things that, like, sort of make you, question the nature of reality, so to speak. And one of the episodes I did was about doppelgangers and why a lot of our media. What's most frightening to me is when you're in a scary movie, or you're watching a scary movie, and the main character has to fight an enemy that looks just like that is you, right? It's them. It's like a doppelganger of themselves. That has always been unnerving to me. I think I did an episode where I talked about how I saw myself in a dream. And that whole experience was just really weird, because who knows you more than you know yourself, right? So that person knows your strengths and they also know your weakness because it's you in a way. And you can handle something that's external. But a lot of people who, for example, succumb to suicide, it's because there's a voice in their head that they can't turn off. Your biggest critic isn't external. It's that voice in your head that won't shut up, that won't stop, that leads you, that goads you, that whispers things to you, in your weakest moments. And a lot of people don't have defenses to that, and that's what we've done in this country. It's like the movie Annihilation, where you have these women, they go in and with their weapons and their guns, and they're going to fight this enemy. But this enemy has co-opted our own nature, our own defenses, and have turned that, weaponized that, and then used that against us. And people, you're seeing a lot of chatter like about QAnon and about the Russians and their bots, and this has been a calculated effort. What's the defense of that when you have external circumstances that are influencing, those within? Like, to repeat, the call is coming from inside the house, when you're, quote, when an enemy of the state could be your next door neighbor, it's just been a confluence of just total shit, from COVID to the lockdowns to, to the elections, to, the insurrection at the riot at the Capitol, and to now. It's just one thing after another. And I'm starting to wonder if people really are okay. I mean, obviously they're not, but is this sustainable? And more importantly, it's not just happening in the U.S. Like, I think it's funny when I go on Twitter and I read, comments of people in other countries, like, mocking us. Like, I read a comment today from somebody in the UK calling us a banana republic. And I'm just like, bro, this shit's going to happen over there too. Like, what we're witnessing is not something that's just, it's occurring. It's a calculated strike against Western nations. And the for all our sins, the U.S. has been the power, the authority that is able to sort of organize and lead, the effort against what's happening. But because of what happened with Trump and with our president, being compromised, the rest of the world is sort of like, really? Maybe I'm just saying that. Maybe I'm a little myopic because I'm an American, but that's what it seems. You're seeing what's happening in the UK with Brexit and things of that nature, but they're also fighting their versions of social media, turning everyday average Joes into paranoid, deluded terrorists or terrorists in the making, who genuinely believe what an individual by the name of Q, who they don't know, they don't know who this person is, and has just been saying crazy shit, that people believe this stuff and are acting on that belief. And the people who believe these things have now infiltrated government. And some people may not be, dumb enough to outwardly express their beliefs, but they're there. What is the counter to that? How do you fight that without the risk of the rest of us losing our freedoms, our freedom of expression? Like, it seems it's very dicey what is happening and where we seem to be heading to. And so once again, I think this is a recording that I'm doing for myself. I hope to be able to re-listen to this and think, you know what, I was a little overly cautious, but, it all turned out to be okay, Or I might listen to this and just be like, I was almost too optimistic and things are not okay. We'll see. Time will tell, won't it? Yeah? I wrote something today on my Twitter about how, there was a video of this older retired vet, looked to be about maybe 75, 80 years old. And he was saying, like, the fact that we now have to, vet the National Guard to make sure that none of them actually turn, right? It's like the guard analogy at the beginning of this episode. I talked about where you spend all this money on security cameras and a dog and a guard, and then the guard actually ends up turning on you, and you didn't see that coming. Well, that's what we're doing. We're having to vet National Guard members to make sure that they're not members of, hate groups or white supremacy groups or things of that nature. And he was saying this is a shame. Like, why is this happening? This is not 18, this isn't the 1800s. This isn't the 1700s. Why is this happening? This is 2021. And my response to that was, we're dealing with a group of people who who don't believe in evolution and think progress is somehow an existential threat to their very existence. Right? So once again, we're dealing with people who literally don't believe in evolution and somehow view progress as an existential threat to their way of life, to who they are, to what they are. So of course you're going to see regression and regressive acts and sort of a de-evolution of society when they act, because their belief and their beliefs is shaping their perception of reality, and they're trying to impose said perception on the rest of us. I've spoken on this podcast about the Big Bounce, right? Which is this emerging cosmological theory that about what preceded the Big Bang. So the theory is basically at the beginning of the universe that we see now, the beginning of the universe that we see now was actually the end of a previous universe, and that life is not progressing in a line, but it's more of a circle. And one of my friends actually made a very beautiful analogy, and they said, like, nothing in nature is, progresses in a perfectly straight line. Nothing in nature is straight. So their argument was that time isn't linear. And I was like, absolutely right. Everything that we are seeing in physics, everything that we're seeing in, ancient religion, everything that we're observing, it's all a cycle. Even the seasons, right? It's all a circle, right? It's all winter, spring, summer, fall. Winter, spring, summer, fall. It's a circle. Or you can use the reincarnation, right? Death, rebirth, life, death, rebirth, life. It's a circle. It's a cycle. So you have to, at a certain point, sort of look, if you believe in, evolution, you kind of, even if you believe in intelligent design, in the sense of like intelligent design set off the series of what we're seeing now, or if you believe in the simulation hypothesis, everything progresses. Like if it's in a video game, right? You can look back at, I always like to use World of Warcraft as an analogy, right? Because it started off, I believe, as a card game, and then I think it moved to a board game, and then it became like a computer game, but it was a single player game, and then it evolved into an MMORPG. And then you had Vanilla WoW, and then you had the Burning Crusades, and then you had Wrath of the Lich King, and then it was like another expansion pack. But ultimately, you're starting to see, as the programmers learn, the graphics get better, and as technology evolves, the graphics get better, the gameplay gets better, the whole experience becomes better. And so you kind of instinctively look to things and expect growth. If there is no growth, if it starts to regress, then that's something that is sick, right? If I plant a tree, right? America isn't very old. And comparatively, it's not a very old civilization. It's just a few hundred years or so, right? So what we want is a democracy that expands, and grows and is sustained, right? That's what we want. So just like you want your children when they're born to evolve into functioning adults, right? It's everywhere. You see growth, right, as a good thing, and then any impediment to growth as a bad thing. But if you legit don't believe in evolution, and you legit think people who want progressives are somehow evil, you are going to be problematic, because you're going to kind of rail against anything that threatens the status quo, that threatens change, because you're unable and incapable of growing, of changing, of evolving. If you don't believe in it, then you don't expect it to happen. And anything that shows promise in that direction, you're threatened by that. That's a problem, and it's a problem that needs to address, because if you're dealing with a group of people who do not want progress, right? Think about it as if it's a body, right? And there's just some cells in the body, right? It's a body of a child, the body of a baby or a teenager, right? And there's some cells that are like, okay, the next step is a preteen, right? The next step is, okay, puberty, right? Now, that's natural, right? The next step in American history is that we need to come together. That's part of our evolution, right? So you started off with this fucked up history where you came to people's country and wiped them out, right? And then took their land. And then you brought other people over here and you enslaved them. And then you enslaved their children, turned them into chattel, right? And then you oppressed them, right? Okay, as we grow, as we evolve, we learn, not just as a country, but as a fucking race, right? A human race, right? We look around and we go, this is not okay. Okay, this is not okay. So then you adapt and you change. Now, if there is a segment of the population that says, no, I don't want there to be change. In fact, I want things to go backwards, right? I want women to go back to the house, right? I want women to not be able to have to be in charge of their own reproduction, to not have reproductive rights, right? Like, that's a problem. That's problematic. That is not conducive for a overall society that evolves to something better. And that's how civilizations fall. If they are allowed to continue to essentially try to bring the rest of us down, that's how you sicken a society. Right? If they stay in power. So you look at people, you look at the country, let's say Afghanistan, right? We're all existing right now simultaneously in 2021. But there is, a group of people in a country like Afghanistan who hold power. They are against evolution. They want to hold on to things. And so what you see is a lack of progress. Right? Because that's exactly what they want. They believe that things should be conserved. They believe that things should be the same. And so you see women being oppressed. You see people of color being oppressed. You see free thought being censored. And so you take two societies that are existing in the same time, but the ideologies, right, that are dominant in one society is reflected in a reality where there is no progress, or there's very slow progress, right? And now we're seeing this ideology sort of being attempted to in our society, right? Where people who don't want progress and think things should just be conserved rather. You're seeing them wanting power, wanting to fight for power. I saw videos of the people who, after they sacked the Capitol, went in there and started praying. Somehow they said that this was, God's holy war, right? That's madness, right? Like, what century are you living in? You're not a fucking crusader, but they want to take us back to that time. And I'm sure if you query a lot of these people, they also think in that mindset, right? Because in their mind, that period in time was what was most beneficial for them. They don't want to grow. That's a problem. And so if the people, the logic, fair-minded people who ideologically understand and know that for something to be healthy, it must grow, right? You have an emotionally stunted and mentally stunted president, and he has led the country. We gave him power, not me directly, because I didn't vote for this asshole, but we allowed him to take power. He shouldn't have even been nominated, but somehow we allowed him to take power. And so for 4 years, he has led, and as a result of that, he has also emboldened people who are psychologically, emotionally stunted, right? Who don't want progress. And so that's what we're seeing now. We're seeing a regression. You're seeing people storm the Capitol and act like animals. It's a thin line, guys, between chaos and civilization. It's a very thin line. It's a very thin line that humanity has to walk, and has to walk finely, and understand that at any point in time, the wrong sort of circumstances or a little bit of bad luck can flip a society, right? It's like a plant, right? You need, light, you need water, you need soil, you need the right environment for it to grow. Okay, you take one thing away, right? Don't give the plant light. It's going to die. Don't give a plant water. It's going to die. Don't give it the right nutrients. It's going to die. It needs all of these things in place so that it can grow and bear fruit. Okay? So right now, we are in a situation where we're trying to grow our civilization. I want an America that in 300, 400 years is sustained and we continue to learn, we continue to grow. Right? And then other countries look to us. And I'm not saying America is perfect. There's some shit that we have done that this is probably our atonement, right? This is probably what we're seeing right now is karma. Because when I look at things like this that are happening now, I imagine, if what happened on the 6th of January happened in any other country, particularly an oil-rich nation, we would have gone there and bombed the fuck out of them immediately. We wouldn't, the government wouldn't have waited for Congress to declare war. We would just been like, nope, and just bomb the shit out of them. You know it. We know this, and we allow ourselves to kind of trust the process and let it kind of play out. But we don't afford other countries that same luxury. We haven't in the past. And that's a problem. And that's something that I hope we learn from this. Compassion, what it feels like to be a citizen in a country where you're watching the craziest versions of yourself, the most regressive versions of your society, clamor for power, and you're civilized and you're living in your homeland and you're watching this shit happen and you're feeling, powerless. Like, I hope we as Americans look at this and feel a bit of compassion for other countries that our government has invaded and bombed, because I certainly have. I mean, it's crossed my mind more than once, like if everything they're experiencing right now would have happened in literally any other country, right? Trust me, that troops would have been sent to occupy them. These are facts. Maybe next time we're not so quick to war, because now we know what it feels like to watch, a tyrant, driven by just pure ego, try to upend things and then watch people actually follow him. I think that's the hardest part for a lot of Americans to think like, wow, there are people who aren't thinking logically, aren't thinking rationally. Like, what is going on? So I hope this teaches us some compassion and empathy. I'm generally hopeful for the future because, even if I don't agree in evolution in the traditional sense, like I don't think we evolved from monkeys. I think that's fucking stupid, just in my opinion. And there's plenty of counter arguments to the theory of evolution. But I do believe in the idea of progress, of adaptation, of growth. And I don't, in a traditional sense, or maybe in a non-traditional sense, I don't know how to phrase that, right? But certainly growth, right? If you take a seed and the seed becomes a tree, could you argue that the seed evolves into a tree? Get what I mean? And of course, I always kind of hold steadfast to the simulation hypothesis. And so I still kind of tend to view things more in that way. I do think that if you ask me, for example, what came first, the chicken or the egg, I would say the chicken, because when you design a video game, you don't put the seeds of things, right? You put the fully formed things there, and then you make them sort of have the ability to, reproduce and recreate itself, kind of thing, right? Like if you're playing The Sims and you don't, and you get a pet chicken or whatever, right? You don't start off with an egg, right? You get the chicken and then the chicken lays eggs. So that's my sort of idea That's where I stand, my perception of reality. So to me, when you're watching a situation and you're like, this is where I want society to go, right? My idea of our future is bright, right? The same way when you are a gardener and you nurture a plant, because you're nurturing the plant, you're putting time, energy, effort, resources into the seed because you want that, or seedling, because you want that plant to grow and bear fruit. You would be naturally protective of any sort of blight, any sort of sickness, any sort of thing that seeks to destroy that. And so I see these individuals as a sort of blight to our democracy that should be addressed. People should be arrested for breaking the law, and figuring out, figuring out, first of all, who the fuck QAnon is, right? And then that motherfucker needs to be arrested, because it's like the Wizard of Oz, right? When you make yourself anonymous, it sort of adds to the sense of like a supernatural, like this is a supernatural thing. It's a blank slate that people can kind of project whatever perceptions they have of this individual onto, and so that individual becomes kind of this entity, kind of that's larger than life. And when you unmask it, you see it for what it is, then the power fades away. Right? And that needs to be done. And people on the fringe, need to be properly, taught critical thinking. Don't just see shit online and then just run with it. Don't just watch a YouTube video and then believe it. Apply critical thinking. That's something that seems to really be, missing here in a lot of these situations. People just go, oh, well, I saw it on the internet, so it's not true. There should be that moment where you pause and go, I don't know if this is true or not. I don't know who's saying this. I don't know why they're saying this. I don't know where this is coming from. Let me just accept the fact that I don't know, if this is 100% true, just because somebody said it's true. Let me not just accept that it's true and run with it, regardless of who says it, because that's part of the problem that happened with a lot of Trump followers and Trump sympathizers, not synthesizers. Okay. You have a guy and there are newspaper articles from 2016, okay, that said that Trump was already preparing to declare back in 2016 that the election was fraudulent. He was expecting to lose. And when he lost, he planned that when he lost, he would have claimed that the election was fraudulent. And essentially, he would have done exactly what he did in November up until now. I mean, this was always part of his plan, period. It was always, his ego was that fragile that I'm sure that before he even decided to win, before he even decided to run, he told himself, I'm going to run. What's the worst that can happen? If I lose, I can just spin it and say it was fraudulent. And then I can use that to launch, my own news network. That was his thinking. And then he won, which a person who thinks critically would have been like, well, he was kind of basically claiming fraud just 4 years ago, and then he won. Wouldn't that give you pause, to be like, okay, he's not telling the truth. Clearly it's just a sore fucking loser who's saying this to protect his ego, on an international scale, because he already said he was going to do this. Where does that critical thinking click in? Or there's that one guy who I distinctively remember this, or distinctly, whatever. I remember this. It was during the Pizzagate the whole thing about Pizzagate with this guy. Online was circulating. I saw it on Instagram. But online that was circulating, they were saying that in the basement of this pizza place in Washington, D.C., all of these Democrats were pedophiles, and they were meeting to prey on kids and all that. So this poor guy raided this pizza place thinking because he believed what he saw online, and so he raided this pizza place to quote save children. So his heart was in the right place, and he later on apologized, but then he had to go to jail. Like he was in jail for 4 years. I don't know if he's even still in jail because he went in there guns blazing, and who knows if he's still what he believes at this point in time. But that's somebody whose life was lost, or at least 4 years of his life has been lost, gone, wasted because he believes some shit online. I'm not saying that you shouldn't question, the narrative, right? I'm not saying you just take everything that the government says to you or the media says to you with a grain of salt. I'm not saying that. But, question fucking everything. If you can't just be like, well, the media isn't telling us the truth, but some guy on the internet is, or some post that I saw, is. Deep fake videos exist, guys. Photoshop exists. There are people out there who are foreign actors, right? Or just domestic trolls who believe a certain thing and they know the power of the internet, so they just create a meme and then spread it. These memes don't just fall from the sky. They're not manna from heaven, right? They were created by human beings for a particular purpose, right? You can't just believe everything that you see. We really need to learn how to use social media responsibly. I mean, I feel like at this point it's like a given, but it needs to be said. We don't know how to use social media responsibly at all. It's fucking up our societies. Legit. I wrote about how so I've been watching Star Trek the last couple of weeks or so, or months actually. I finished with the Next Generation, tried a couple other series, and now I'm watching the Voyager. I don't like the premise necessarily, the whole Lost in Space. I actually jumped to the last episode of the last season just to see how they get home, because I'm just kind of person who watches, I'll read the last chapter of a book just so I know it ends. For the most part, I'm that kind of person. And sometimes I watch seasons in reverse. I'll watch the last episode and then the episode for the last, and then I'll go and watch the first episode, and then that's how my mind works. I'm just that person. I just dropped something. What was I saying? But yeah, so you have these people who just I forgot what I was talking about, but yeah, I'll probably remember. But you have these people who just kind of believe everything that they see online. Why would you say, okay, the media and the news is lying to you, but some random person on 4chan on Twitter somehow is telling the truth, and some guy who put together YouTube videos also telling the truth? You need to reserve judgment. Reserve judgment. Pause, evaluate the information that you're giving, and then just don't react to that. Chill. Oh, okay, Star Trek. So I've been watching Star Trek, and I remember now. And one of the big things that kind of recurs through all of the different series, is something called the Prime Directive. Or is it the Prime Directive or the Prime Directive? I think it's the Prime Directive. But essentially what the Prime Directive is, it's either directive or derivative. It doesn't matter. You know what I mean. But what it is that because they're such an advanced civilization, they have to more or less observe less civilized civilizations, from arm's length, so to speak, without interfering with their natural progression, for obvious reasons, right? And then I look at cell phone technology and see how quickly, it has sort of evolved through, since its inception. And there's a part of me that wonders if a lot of this information that we have that has helped us construct things like cell phones and computers and social media and quantum computing did not come from, let's say, recovered, extraterrestrial spacecraft. And I know you're probably going to raise your eyebrow, but I don't care. There's enough information at this point. I have a Google alert set for UFOs. So basically you can set up a Google alert that will crawl the internet for any story having to do with any sort of topic that you're interested in. So I have one for UFOs. I have one for the CIA. I have one for Department of Defense. I have one for DARPA. And then they just email it to you. Any news article that has to do with whatever your topic of interest is. The UFO one, it's kind of unsettling how many articles, how many people are reporting, UFOs on a daily basis. It kind of has just been going on under the radar. So to think that, believing that we're not the only people on this planet Whether they're little green men, I don't know. But to me, my theory is that there is more to Earth than we have discovered. There are, and maybe not even like on the surface, perhaps in the surface, in the Earth, right? That it's not just us on the surface that are on the planet. Like, I've said this in previous episodes where I've said, to a person that's isolated in an Amazonian forest, they think that it's just them. If I showed up and walked up to them and I'm like, here, look at my cell phone, they would either treat me like a god or kill me, or both. But that's because they're so removed from the rest of us that they're not even able to contemplate the fact that society has evolved to the point that we have, cell phones and televisions and even newspapers and books and things like that, right? Because they're detached. And I just keep thinking, like, there's got to be, like, we're only on the surface and there's only so much that we have explored on this planet. We just think we know everything. We're such assholes, like myself included, where we just operate on the premise that we just know everything. And we don't. Every civilization thought they knew everything, and then they didn't, right? Every civilization thought that it was just them until they encountered other civilizations. And I just think, we've had enough stories that just of this kind of as a recurring phenomenon to just think that, oh no, everybody has just been imagining the same sort of entities and the same sort of UFOs since whatever. I think it's ridiculous. So I stand by my theory. I'm not calling it a fact, because it's still a theory, until proven strongly one way or the other. But it is my theory that a lot of the technology that we have now stems from a reverse engineering of, quote, extraterrestrial technology from maybe, scavenged? I can't speak today. Scavenged from crash sites. And that brings to mind the Prime Directive, which is like, I feel like we're not suited. We weren't meant to have this technology. And now that we have it, like, we're all either on it all the time or obsessed with it. It's like warping our progression, right? And our minds psychologically, our biology even, isn't evolving as quickly as the technology is, right? So it's getting to the point where almost like primitives that have been given guns, right? Imagine you give a Cro-Magnon a fucking AK-47, right? Like, what is it going to do with that, right? The technology feels like it's out of time. Cell phone technology, quantum computing, it feels like it doesn't necessarily belong in this timeline. And that's why I'm a little concerned, because we're watching this and we're learning as we go, but we're also, there's some aspects of our societies that are paying a price for it. And I just hope we can get it together and figure out how to kind of tamper this before we're destroyed by it. I mean, on one end, I'm talking to a person, I'm talking to people, thousands of miles away, and you're listening to me from thousands of miles away. At any point in time, if I want to search for anything, right, it's all in my hand, right? As far as we know historically, no civilization, at least in modern times. I mean, there's been some questions about whether there are civilizations that came, like Atlantis, I talked about in the Guns and Drugs episode. The concurrent existence of evolved, technologically advanced civilizations existing with like cavemen at the same time. I mean, it's happening now. So, I brought up the analogy of like comparing like, people in Afghanistan to people living in, the UK or in the United States. Like, you can have drastically different societies, one that's super technologically evolved, and then one that's just sort of like, living off the land, so to speak, existing concurrently. But yeah, I'm watching how this is kind of influencing and affecting our lives, and I just feel like this is, while it's a gift in one way, it also seems like it comes with a price, right? There's nothing the gods that don't give. There's nothing the God gives. There is nothing the gods give us that isn't without a price, so to speak. And we're seeing it played out. We've got to adapt, and we've got to adapt fast. I mean, we do. I don't think we can continue down this path, because that fine line that I'm talking about, that is needed to sustain civility, like somebody's pulling at the threads, like we're pulling at the threads here, and we don't want that. What we don't want to see is something like that to unravel, and then we just descend into chaos. We just evolve, into chaos. We need to be caretakers, not just of the earth, right, but of our own, of mankind, of our own progress. We need to be caretakers of our own progress. We need to be caretakers of our own progress. There's so many problems, and I don't know if these problems have always just existed and we're just now seeing it. That's probably the case. Or if it's really being amplified, or maybe both. I don't know. I don't know, but we've got to kind of get a handle on things. This is not cool. Yeah. So, this is a message to my future self. If at any point, and you can say this to your future self as well, if there's at any point where it's within your power to affect change, to be one of the stewards that helps in your little way shape humanity and guide us. One person can make a difference. I say this a lot, and it's true. And you may not always get recognition, but if all of us just do our own little part to help shape and guide humanity to an evolution, an evolved society, like the kind that you see, in Star Trek, where we're integrated, right? And we realize our strengths, right? Instead of focusing on our weaknesses, we work together as a race, right? Right now, for some reason, we have it in our minds that it's different races, right? That's bullshit. It's one race. And every color, every culture, every ethnic group, it has something to bring to the table. And the smart thing to do as a society is to pull all of that together and use the resources each ethnic group has to offer to work towards something better. Each group has something to bring to the table. If you want to shape reality, if you want to shape society towards something that's progressive, right now you have ingredients, right? You have white people, that's an ingredient, and they have their strengths. You have black people, that's an ingredient, and we have our strengths. You have Asians, that's an ingredient, they have their strengths. You have Native Americans, you have Latin Americans, they have their strength, they have their beauty. It's like color, it's like painting, right? I have a black tube, a brown tube, a white tube, a yellow tube, right? Separately, I can't create anything. Right? I mean, you can, but it wouldn't be a dynamic painting, right? If I just took, a canvas and I was just red here, separate, white here, separate, black here, and just that's a graph. That's not a painting, right? The way you make something beautiful, the way you create a masterpiece is you start blending those fucking pigments together, and that's how you create a beautiful picture. You blend them together and create something beautiful. Christianity. I am not a religious person. I'm actually very against what religion has become. But it's not to say that it doesn't have its strong suit. The strong suit is that, for better or worse, it does give people a sense of community. Okay, let's take something from that, because humanity does need a sense of community. But, when that sense of community is is structured around the idea of isolating other people that don't fit into the community, that's a problem. Ostracizing, attacking, destroying people who don't fit into that community, that's a problem. Okay? So let's get rid of the problem and focus on the feature. Right? I feel like in some way this is a great experiment. There's many times when I've sat, in contemplation and wondered if we're not being watched, like observed, right? So many books in religion mention watchers. Even just in everyday life, you ever just get a feeling like you're being observed? Like if you're sitting and all of a sudden you just get this weird, like you look around, there's nothing there that you can see, but you just have this like uneasy feeling or being watched. You're being watched. I feel that about humanity. You get all these various cultures and you just kind of plop them in different places, and it's like, let's see what happens. Let's see what they do. We've got to come together to build something. We got to come together to create something beautiful. You got to put colors together to paint a masterpiece. You see the works of Monet, or the works of Van Gogh, and the expression that just from blending so many different colors together, you have this like beautiful masterpiece. But we ourselves are the ones who can create that masterpiece, right? And I'm seeing that done, masterfully for the most part. You have people coming out and saying, this isn't okay, calling people out on their bullshit. When you see people storming the Capitol with a gun, stop calling them protesters. They were there to kill people. If they were brown, you would call them terrorists. So call them terrorists. Stop looking at their skin color and using that as an excuse to absolve them of their crimes. Right? And I'm seeing that. Seeing people kind of wake up to that, and that's a good thing. But we have to kind of stay on that. We've been guilty of having kind of a short attention span, so to speak. Okay, what's the next story? But I don't want us to really move past that, past what happens, because past what happened on the 6th, because that was a problem. And that problem isn't going to magically go away on the 20th. And we're the ones who, at least in theory, are shaping our reality. At least in theory. And so we need to take responsibility for that. We need to take responsibility. Each and every one of us needs to take responsibility by doing our little part to shape reality, to shape the progressive reality, right? To shape the evolution of humanity that we want, that we desire. A future that you want to live in, a future that you're proud of, like 200 years from now. What do you want the world to look like? 300 years from now, 400 years from now, what do you want progress? Do your part. Speak to people. Organize. Form communities. We're hurting right now. All of us. I mean, you can feel it. It's tangible. Some people can mask it and act like, it's okay. But there's this deep sort of sense of fear. But because of the lockdowns that have happened across the world, humanity, we need this network. We need each other, and a lot of people are very lonely people. And what I've learned is that a lot of people who turn to these extremist groups did so because, I mean, I've seen tweets of people saying, when I'm on social media and I tweet something, I would get like nobody responding to me. But then when I went, to Q or QAnon and I would say something, all of a sudden like people were responding to me and I felt relevant. Well, that's something there. Like it's sad, but there's something there that there's a need there that's being met. There's a need there that's being met. But it's being met by the wrong thing, by dangerous rhetoric. And the way that we start shaping our future towards progress is that we start forming communities again. Reach out to people. You have these hate groups that are now organizing on Telegram and shit like that. I don't recommend Telegram. I've actually been trying to find different apps. Right now I'm trying out this app called Discord. Seems cool. But I'm trying to form little groups of like just little tribes even, of people that also want progress, also see a bigger picture, right? Also have a desire to shape our reality towards something that's progressive and evolved and that's, based on unity and peace, not anger and fucking hate. And I encourage you to do the same. Start organizing, start reaching out to people. There's some lonely people out there. We're all feeling this. We are. But we don't have to be complacent in that feeling. We can be proactive. The one thing that this group of people are doing, the insurrectionists and the QAnon followers, is that they're organizing. Okay, we need to organize as well. But you need to organize from a place not of hate, but a place of love. And form little tribes. Like I'm going to keep saying the same thing. Form tribes. Look out for each other. Because there is an inherent need. I mean, we're evolved. But there's a biological need, rather. We have evolved from tribes. Like small tribes. Small groups. So we need that. So I'm if you're listening to this right now, organize, find people. If you're on social media, start talking to people, message them, and then pull them into your group. And even if it's just a group where you guys it's a book club, you just talk about stuff all the time. Why can't we start video, group chats? And why can't we, have like Friday night, since everything's locked down right now? Okay, Friday night, like let's do a movie night. Everybody can make a difference. We are the stewards of our own future. It's up to us to shape the world that we want to see. It's up to us to shape the future that we want to experience. Thank you for listening.